Greetings, everyone. I hope that you are well, and welcome to this evening's webinar. And we are speaking on strengthening accountability in government and parliament. My name is Tomoy Campbell, and for this webinar, I'll be your moderator. This webinar will be facilitated by Ms. Jeanette Calder, but just before we get into the substantive part of the presentation, I'm going to lay some ground rules. So Ms. Calder will have her presentation, and thereafter we will have a Q&A session. So don't worry, you'll have the opportunity to ask your questions. You can either raise your hand, unmute and ask, or simply put them in the chat, and I will simply read the question aloud. The recordings can be requested, and it is usually uploaded on YouTube for further access. So don't worry, if you want to go back and watch, that will be facilitated. So ladies and gentlemen, wherever you are, let's get into our webinar for this evening or this morning. We're having the Executive Director of the Jamaica Accountability Meter Portal, JAMP, Ms. Jeanette Calder. Now, Jeanette Calder is fully engaged in civil society advocacy for better public governance. She has been reliably vocal on governance issues, in particular those relating to procurement, corruption, and public sector reform. In 2016, she researched and produced Jamaica's first simplified citizens budget and guide to enhance national budget literacy as a bedrock of improving public financial management and stewardship. Her 2017 research into Jamaica's accountability ecosystem identified major gaps and weaknesses and laid the groundwork for a new civil society initiative. Now, in 2018, she founded the Jamaica Accountability Meter Portal Limited to track, measure, and expose accountability issues in government. She has also pioneered and designed the development of an online portal, JAMP, that seeks to place in the hands of citizens just like you and me, media, academia, and government itself, an accountability tool to strengthen public oversight mechanisms and improve stewardship over public resources and assets. And when you think it couldn't get any better, Ms. Calder is a graduate of the Caribbean School of Architecture with a BA in Architectural Studies and the Institute for Housing and Urban Development, Erasmus University, the Netherlands, with a Master's of Science in Urban Management and Development. Now, her years of work in the Jamaica public sector in key management positions, as well as her service on a number of government boards and committees, exposed her to the challenges that encumber effective public sector management, and it deepened her appreciation of the threats to the responsive public service delivery and the imperative for change. International exposure in countries such as India and Uganda, etc., as a researcher and advisor, which focused on the execution of public-private partnerships for the infrastructure delivery in the public sector, as has enhanced her understanding of the governance challenges in other jurisdictions and the solutions that are harnessed to effectively overcome them. It is against this background that Jeanette Calder has emerged as an yes, thank you, hopeful about improved public governance and accountability in Jamaica. Ladies and gentlemen in Zoom land, please give some virtual round of applause for our presenter, Ms. Jeanette Calder, and welcome her to our virtual stage. Over to you, Ms. Calder.
Thank you very much, Tamoy. I have really been looking forward to this, so much so that my comms team will tell you that about 2 Tuesdays ago, I was sitting in front of my laptop saying, "Where's everybody? Where is the UE alumni?" I mean, I was already ready to present, only to find out that I was 2 weeks early. So thank you very much for the invitation to share with you what is easily one of my favorite subjects. It's about a country that I love, the country that I've chosen to live in, and the country I think God has, for some reason, handpicked me to be here, as are all of us that's on Zoom land, as Tomoy said. So I thank her for setting out the rules, because sometimes I'm not sure if the Q&A during or the Q&A at the end is better, but I am going to roll with the rules as it has been set out. Now, there are 2 sections to my presentation this evening. Most of us, whichever the jurisdictions and the territories that we are in, would realize that we have some commonalities in terms of the challenges that we face. 1 second, guys. I'm going to put my dogs out. 1 second. This is a little distracting for me.
As Miss Calder sorts her dogs, please put in the chat where you're from so that we can identify you. Oh, you're back, Miss
Wonderful.
Calder.
Yes, thank you. But that's a really good idea because I have wanted to get a sense and a feel for how many of the islands are here. But as I was saying a while ago, we share a number of commonalities: cultural, socio-political, economic. And so though this evening I'll be sharing primarily what's been happening here in Jamaica, and to share with you, because I have absolutely no intention of leaving you feeling disempowered, depressed. I actually come with the objective that by the time I'm through, maybe not everybody, but I would really like to leave the message that there is hope. And the change that some of us, if not all of us, have been seeking, I think it has been made to look a lot more difficult than it is. So I'd like to share with you what the issues are, and then to share with you some tools that JAMP has designed to enable citizens to really leverage the power that they have for the kind of change that we want. So on that note, I would like to begin by first talking about where our focus lies. I'm not an accountant, as Tomoy would tell you. I'm really studied architecture and urban management and development. But money makes the world go round, love and money. And so it's hard not to talk about public finances if we're going to talk about good governance. For everything that our governments are going to do for us, every policy that they have created as a roadmap to solving some kind of problem has to pretty much be backed by public finances. So a little bit before I came on, I was looking at this graphic. And I said to myself, you know, you kind of pull the stock image of wherever we buy them. And I thought to myself, though, that this is kind of apt because that little plant is really sending a message that I had missed before. For that tree or that plant, which it is now, to grow into the kind of tree that it is designed to be from that seed, that has the capacity for it to grow maybe into an oak tree, a June plum tree, I don't know. The environment in that bag has to be correct. The nutrients that it needs has to be in that bag. It has to be exposed to some water, and it has to be exposed to some good air and some sunlight. I think in designing a society, especially as it relates to governance, it's no different. We have to create the environment that is going to allow for the kind of decisions that our elected representatives and public officials make to be the best that it can be for us. But what is that environment is really, in essence, what we're going to look at this evening. Now, while I was thinking about how to start off talking about the issue, one of my favorite things is history. And for those of us who are Jamaicans, some of you might know that the Gleaner, which is our national, one of the two national newspapers, has an amazing subscription that gives us access to all of its pages from today right back till 1834. And for those of us who remember our history, that's pretty much when slavery ended, yeah? So I was taking a look back into our history and stumbled across something that I thought was really delightful. And I said, well, let me share this with you. This takes us back to April 1963. This was Jamaica's first, what you could call independent, post-independent budget. Now, this was pretty much what the cabinet looked like at the time. And some of us here would be old enough to be able to recognize a few of the people standing there. I can see a very young Edward Seaga, a Hugh Shearer, Donald Sangster, who I'm going to talk about, and of course, Busterman to the Prime Minister himself and a few others. But what struck me about this article and the context for the discussion tonight is what the quotes that were provided for what the then Finance Minister, Donald Sangster, had to say about this particular budget. First of all, he said that we were about to spend more money than ever before in a financial year in Jamaica. No, it gets better. The country had raised enough money to pay for the country's loan requirement for the first time in years. It gets better. Increased revenue estimate, but look at the reason why. Because of the confidence that the people of Jamaica had in this new post-independent government. And we had made a surplus on the year's transactions, which was enabling the government at the time to carry a balance to the surplus account. Now, I don't know if in my years on the planet in this country, I have ever seen anything like that. But it says something to me about what the mood of the country was at the time and the hopes and the expectations. I'm going to ask you, and I'm going to ask, I don't know who has the controls, but I really would like for some of this to be interactive. This was the front page, the day, capturing those statements. But can you see anything else on this front page that would speak to you about what I would call the tension in governance between the good news on the left? Can you see anything else that you can point? I see the issue, and it is a fascinating dichotomy between what I just said and where I'm going tonight. Is anybody picking it up? Has anybody seen it? Can they actually unmute Tamoy, or is it not possible for them to?
Well, they can. I see Renee Baptiste, so you can go ahead, Renee.
Wonderful. Go ahead, Renee.
I'm from St. Vincent and the Grenadines.
Wonderful. Hi.
Yes, I see three-man commission named to probe.
Absolutely.
I
was fascinated by that when I saw it, Renee. So the KCAC in Jamaica is basically what you would probably have in your country as a parish council. Do you have that there? So
No,
we see, what do you have? What do you call it? Is it St. Vincent?
We don't, yes, it's not a parish council. It's supposed to have a public accounts committee under the Constitution when you want to discuss any matter that looks not right in the budget.
Right.
And also to debate or ask questions on the Director of Audit's report. Right.
I think, and we're going to get into that, so I'm glad to hear you mention that, Renee. I think most, if not all, Westminster parliaments, which most of the Commonwealth countries have, used that Public Accounts Committee. It's something we inherited from the British. But the KCAC in this article is actually referring to what we would probably call local government. So it's a council of elected councillors that basically attend to what we would call local government, not central government, but local government needs for the people. Now, I'm just going to pull up for you really quickly what was said there, because it really sets the context in a marvelous way for the challenge that we have. It says, the decision to probe this parish council operations was announced last week by the Prime Minister then, it was Alexander Bustamante, who said that things had reached such proportions that the investigation was necessary. It was also noteworthy in the article that it was saying that this is the second time that this had to be done. Way back in 1930, a similar probe had to be carried out. Now, I have what I call here my Auditor General scrapbook. Again, an Auditor General is really something every island here ought to have, again, coming from the British system. But one day I sat down going through that same, what I call the Gleaner archives, and I came across all of these headlines. And from time to time, when I present on this issue, I would ask the folks in the audience or on Zoom, can you guess when these articles were written? And one of the reasons it's a useful question to ask is because these headlines are still with us today, and most Jamaicans guess within about 5 years. But if I click the next button, you can see that from 1958. And most of the islands, I think, got independence in the 60s. So you can tell that even before we were independent, we were facing serious problems as it relates to governance, public financial management, corruption, fraud, misappropriation. So the question that was dogging me, Tamar told you in the introduction that I worked in the government, and that is true. But maybe it was because of the things that I saw, and maybe the things that I saw on boards that got me really interested in the question of how our monies are spent and how these decisions are made. So the question that I wanted to ask myself and then to share with the rest of the Jamaicans is, why are these headlines repeating themselves decade after decade, regardless of what laws we have, what policies we have, or whichever government is actually in power? Now this, let me see, from 1958 coming all the way down to 2016 at the time is when I collected this. Now that very same year, I decided to look at what was happening in Jamaica. And again, I collected quite a few headlines that indicates that very little was changing. So the question was, are we alone? No, we're not. I just went on the internet and Googled a few things happening last year. Chose Trinidad and Tobago, took a look at St. Lucia. And if there are any Trinidadians here and St. Lucians, this would be pretty familiar to them. But for those who might not be familiar, in short, we had a situation last year in Trinidad at Mandela Park, where the government had a contract that they were going to give to a private sector company to lay down what we call AstroTurf. Usually that we put them on football fields. lay that down at the park, which seemed like a good idea. But the idea was that the public now was going to have to pay to enter a park, which they never used to have to do, in order for that private company to recover their funds. And I don't need to tell you how the Trinidadians felt about it. There were no public consultations, and this was not open to tender. Then looking at the situation in St. Lucia, I was a little bowled over because this too reminded me of some of the things we face here in Jamaica. Now, a minister wrote a letter, gave it to a private sector company, basically committing to any bank that he took this letter to, that he would be prepared to use the taxpayers' funds to pay back a $62 million US loan, for which this company was going to provide a hospital and a street lighting project. Again, no public tender, no other company getting a chance to produce value for money. And I'm happy to say it didn't appear as if this went anywhere, but these are some of the issues we want to look at and find out tonight. What can citizens do? Now, the Jamaica Accountability Meter portal exists. It's really basically 2 years old, and we've been building out some tools, but I'd really like to put it to you that tonight we need one, by whatever name you call it, but the idea of citizens engaging to track government and to provide oversight is going to become key. Now, one of the reasons I'm encouraged to do what we do is because I am convinced that Jamaica, and looking at some of the other islands, we have the ingredients for change already in place. That's my view, and I'm hoping to convince you of that this evening. The first thing I want to look at is the matter of legislation, very quickly. I'm just going to stop at the access to information legislation, because if Jamaica didn't have this, I just want to be honest with you that what JAMP is doing is not something that we would have been able to do successfully. I know Trinidad has had one freedom of information legislation since 1999. I think, who else? I think Barbados has had one in draft mode since 2008. I'm not 100% sure about the others, but I think there are about 7 Caribbean countries that have access to legislation whereby, and I'll explain how JAMP uses it. When we see something that goes wrong in government, whether it's a breach, whether it's a matter of corruption, we have here in Jamaica something we call the 9-day wonder. And it is something we criticize each other about, which basically says, hey, something go wrong. We talk about it for 9 days, and then after that, we forget about it, which is one of the reasons why those headlines continue to repeat itself. So JAMP thought, what if we took the access to information legislation, which empowers citizens, and as a matter of fact, in Jamaica, anybody, you don't even have to be a national, to ask of the government any question, save and except for a few things like national security. And within 30 or 60 days, you are required to get an answer from your government. Now, that's an extremely powerful tool that has been placed in the hands of citizens here in Jamaica, and as I said, about 7 of the other islands. But the question tonight, especially for the 54 of us here, is, have you ever utilized this piece of legislation? If your government has given you this kind of power, and if you have concerns about governance, have you ever decided that, why don't I take this legislation and ask questions and see what answers I get? And see how empowered I feel to continue doing this. And I'm going to show you how we're using it in a little while. The second thing is press freedom. Fairly good around the Caribbean. Jamaica, I think of all the indices that you can measure a country on, this is the one that I think we have good reasons to feel proud. Out of 180 countries, we sometimes dangle between 6, 7, and 8, and I think we're at 7 now. I have some notes here that indicate that Trinidad, not bad, at 31 out of 180, that's pretty good. Belize at 53. I couldn't get information on any other island, but it's for you to determine whether or not you think you have an active press, a press that's monitoring, a press that's investigating, and a press that's letting you know what is happening in your country. But that's going to be a significant ingredient. The third one for us are oversight agencies. In a couple of slides, I'm going to show you what we have in Jamaica, which I assume Rennie already told me, the Public Accounts Committee is there, but I'm speaking outside of government itself. The oversight agencies that provide reports that let you know what's happening in government. A question again for all the citizens on this Zoom call is, have you ever read a report? This is your business. And I say with every hashtag I put on Twitter these days, mind your business, Jamaica. This report is for you. How many of us here have ever read a Contractor General, if you have that in your country, your Auditor General's report, a Public Accounts Committee annual report seeing what recommendations are being made to clean up your country. And if you haven't read it, well, then I have some questions in a little while for you, but these are some things for us to consider. As Renee said, we have parliamentary oversight committees, of which the PAC is chief, but there are some other ones in different countries. But that is also key. We're going to get into that in a little while. Civil society organizations, present and active in Jamaica, dealing with accountability on a range of issues. We have JET, that's looking at accountability as it relates to the environment and how the government is a steward of those resources. We have Jamaicans for Justice, looking at human rights. We have NIA and JAMP, looking at accountability and public financial management. How many organizations are alive and vibrant in your island that is there, as we would hope, looking out for the citizens' interest and lobbying and advocating government for change? Now, development partners. This is another important ingredient because, for example, JAMP couldn't be doing what it is trying to do without the support of the Inter-American Development Bank and the EU, which is our primary support. So you have external partners who are willing to come in, put the money on the table to empower you. How is it going in your country? That's something I want to look at. And the last two is technology. I'm particularly intrigued about what citizens can do with digital technology. I say a lot to the young people here when I talk to them that Taki, which is one of our slave rebellion, Taki, Sam Sharp, Nani, didn't have the power of a cell phone. They were trying to impact a monarchy some 9,000 miles away. Here in Jamaica, I think it's extraordinarily exciting, there in Barbados and Trinidad, Antigua, that we have the power of technology where we can connect with our parliamentarians at the click of a button. But how are we utilizing it is what I'd like to demonstrate in a little bit. Last but by no means least, and this is really where the bulk of my hope lies, I do not believe it's going to be different in any of the other islands. We have some young people today who are not anywhere as patient as the generations before. They know what they want. They have no desire for anything to stand in their way. I think what organizations like JAMP and the others in the other islands need to do is to empower them, give them the tools they need, and to watch them fly. Now, these are the 8 reasons, and there are a few more, but the 8 main reasons why I am encouraged to step into governance as a citizen, and I'm encouraging others too, because I really do believe that the main ingredients are there. The question is, what are we waiting as a catalyst to begin to see the kind of governance that we want? Now, this is the magic word for me. If we think about it in our personal lives, or the 59 of us that are on the Zoom call, none of us could get where we are today without this. Whether it is the parent, whether it was the pastor, whether it was the employer, whether it was the teacher who saw that we could do better than we think we could and kept pressing into us. But the idea that we start with a personal accountability, move up to organizational accountability and national accountability, I think is really the key to excellence. I don't think this is going to be different because I suspect this is something most of the islanders have in common. But here in Jamaica, when we talk about accountability, people actually see it as a negative word. They identify it with something that means punishment. They see it as something that is associated with informer. And that is probably the goal of JAMP, which is to redefine accountability as really an act of love. My view of it is you hold to account the things that matter. You hold to account the people that matter. And so I love this definition because it includes here a word that I think is extraordinarily important. And I want you to think about it in the context now of government and those who represent us. Accountability is the obligation to explain, justify, and take responsibility for one's actions. That's a very generic and basic definition, but I want to share with you what we have in here in terms of our understanding of it. It has to be pulled apart when you get into something like government, for example. There's the calling to account and there's the holding to account that needs to take place. Calling to account is where you can get the reports that tell you what happened, when it happened, who did it, and any cost implications. Now, I'm not so sure about the rest of the islands, but I would say that here in Jamaica, citizens have access to enough reports from enough watchdog agencies and the media to be able to act if they do. Now, this is where we run into a little bit of a problem. Holding to account.
100.
Someone's is unmuted. Okay, I'll proceed. Holding to account is actually where I think we run into trouble. Now, that still means that the glass is kind of half full. Not all countries, I think, can reasonably boast about the calling to account. I'm really here to say Jamaica is not doing too badly there. The holding to account now is when we take the information that we get from the calling to account and we can have remedial measures. Yes, some of it includes sanctions usually, if the outcome is not what was desired, required, or planned. And last but not least, on the matter of accountability, I want to flip to show you what our government or how our government defines accountability. Now, I've been saying in a number of forums that if I had the opportunity or when I have the opportunity, I would like to ask our Prime Minister a fair question. And that is, we've been hearing this word accountability, and he would agree for the last 6-7 years. It is something that he campaigned on coming into office. And to his credit, his speeches continued to emphasize accountability. But I've been wondering as a citizen here in Jamaica, what exactly does it mean or what exactly does it look like? Because it is quite possible that I have a different view of it and other citizens do, and our Prime Minister doesn't. But according to the documents here in Jamaica, accountability is, and I love this word, it is an opportunity to improve behavior, productivity, outputs, outcomes, and impacts. And again, it's an opportunity to link individual, institutional, and public performance for what? For the impacts in the public interest. I think that's a fantastic definition. Now, I want to show you, and for those of us in particular who are Jamaicans, these are our 7 chief, what I would say, oversight or watchdog agencies that are crucial in what I call the accountability chain. Now, if I could ask any Jamaican here to guess, I don't know who can add pretty quickly, but it's a significant amount of money that taxpayers are paying to achieve accountability. That's $5.7 billion. Now, just to make sure that it has some meaning to us, that basically could buy or could rather build one state-of-the-art type A hospital, for example, in every parish every year. Now, my question is, if we're spending 5.57 billion, do you think we are getting value for money? No. The issue here becomes these two things. And I deeply suspect that most of us here would say that I'm talking to the UE alumni, so that we are educated Jamaicans and we are educated Caribbean people. But guys, I'm going to level with you. The more I got to understand about governance and democracy, and I mean it in a very basic level, I began to question how we define, for example, education. Now, I worked in the ministry. Before I left the Ministry of Housing, I was administering the joint venture housing program for the government. I had to go to the PAC sometimes. I'm familiar with that. I sat on a couple of boards. I had to contribute to the budget. And I did not know the difference between parliament and government. Not as a means of bragging, but just to make a real point here. 2 masters, relatively successful, don't have a clue that these 2 words are not synonymous. And I'm going to put it to you that the more I do these workshops, is the more I realize that a lot of Jamaicans and maybe a lot of other Caribbean people fall into that trap, and it is a trap because it's extremely important in the issue of accountability and governance to understand the distinction between these 2. Now, I know I'm cheating a little with this question because this is really for those of us who are, yeah, it is. But can anybody tell me which 2 buildings those are? And of course, I know you don't normally see it from this perspective, right? But maybe that's what I'm trying to do tonight, to get us to look at governance from a different perspective and a different angle. But can you tell me which 2 buildings those are? Those are two of the most, perhaps, important buildings on this island. Anybody want to unmute and guess? I'll give you a clue. Do you know which road this is? That's Hope Road. That's a dead giveaway. Anybody?
Is that the PM's office?
Thank you, Paula. Absolutely. Office of the Prime Minister and Jamaica House. And here's another extraordinarily important building. And for me, these spaces have become what I call sacred spaces. Yeah, we have them in all the countries. House of Representatives, the Senate, and these oversight committees. Now, every Monday, the cabinet is meeting back here, making decisions every 10 o'clock. For those of us who are Christians, pray every 10 o'clock. Pray for wisdom, pray for guidance, yeah? Now here, every Tuesday, the House of Representatives meets. The Senate every Friday. The Oversight Committees every Tuesday and Wednesday. And in every one of those spaces, decisions are being made for you and I. And some of us here are going to make some of the most responsible decisions all your life and find out that a decision on a policy can be made here that literally undoes, unfolds, unpacks, reverses some of those decisions. So it is concerning because I don't have the opportunity to do polls, but I wanted to have an idea of how many of us here regularly tune in, how many of us pay attention to what is happening here. Now, as a quick overview, most of us know this. All our parliaments, all the work is done through two sections. MPs in the House of Representatives, we have 63 here in Jamaica, and we know the upper house, we have the Senate. Now, basically, what are the functions of the parliament? Representing the electorate, and that is massive. That's a huge statement that we can't unpack tonight. Passing of the laws for order in the society, for justice in the society. But number three is really what I want to focus on the rest of the slides. That Parliament is there to oversee the work of the government. Now, poor Jeanette in government, I didn't even know that they were not synonymous. But number three there is extraordinarily important. Now, I have a question I want to ask. There is a law that is passed in all of our countries every year. Can anybody tell me the name of a legislation, a law, or a bill that comes before the Parliament every single year? It's one of the most important pieces of legislation, and it's passed on a yearly basis. Must happen. Anybody want to tell me what that is? You can give it a good guess. You're probably saying, Jeanette, what's the point in passing a law every year? Nothing no goes. The budget. Who is that?
Karen Tyrrell.
Karen, I'm so proud of you.
We call it the Appropriations Bill.
What? Renee? No, Renee. It sounds to me like you probably lecture.
Let me put up my hand. I was a former member of Parliament for 10 years.
Oh, no wonder. No wonder. Because
for 10 years.
To be honest with you, Renee, very few people are aware of this, myself included. So I'm in government, I'm contributing to this thing, and I never knew until 2 years ago that it's actually legislation. Now, when I talk to young people and I say this to them, do you know what's the first thing they said to me, Renee? When they learn that the allocation of the budget, who it must go to, how much and when, is legislation. What light do you think comes on in the minds of young people when they hear that? You want to guess what the first question is? Anybody? Or what do you think? Let's say you didn't know this. Think about the decisions that our politicians and our policymakers sometimes as it relates to the budget. And then you learn that this is actually law. Does any light bulb come off? Any question jumps out at you? I'm curious. No? Well, the one that jumped out at me was, if this is legislation, and if it says, for example, that we are to spend 1.2 billion, that would be too much money, $35 million on salary. And this is actually a very common breach in many ministries. And instead of spending 35 million, the permanent secretary authorizes 40. What do you think? Does that say anything to you if this is legislation and it says 35 and somebody says 40? What jumps out at you? Has that person broken the law? And if that person has broken the law, is there anything that a citizen can do if they act contrary to what's in the Appropriations Act? I'm going to come back to that, but that's what jumps out at a number of young people, and that's what jumps out at me. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this slide, folks, in the interest of time. But again, this was something that was another eye-opener for me. Now, in this thing called the budget cycle, in this thing that each of our countries face every year when this Appropriations Act is going to be passed, I used to think of the budget cycle as stage 1 and 2, which is we have 830 billion to develop this year. So the budget has to be formulated. And what does the country do? Our policymakers sit down and they think through what are the challenges, what are the weaknesses, what are we going to face this year? Think about COVID, for example. That was a particular challenge over the last 2 years. They got a budget for that differently than they did the year before. So the budget formulation is taking place through the technocrats in the Ministry of Finance in particular. The priorities are being set out. And they literally send to the ministries somewhat of a template already The ministries don't just get to start putting a budget together. They send a template with some figures and they go through it, put it all together, long story cut short, with the debate, and it's approved. And I used to think that was it. That's the budget cycle. But the truth of it is no. We have this lovely lady to the left here in Jamaica called Lina Jones. And the budget cycle includes the execution of it. So now we got to spend it. And now we really ought to be spending it in alignment with what our parliamentarians set out in that Appropriations Act. Now, the part that gets me most excited, and I never thought of it as a part of the budget cycle, is again, another lovely lady. You notice, guys, that we have, what, 3 of them? That's fantastic. Now, our Auditor General is now responsible for the 4th stage in this budget cycle. Now, she got to go back. She has to check against that Appropriations Act, that same legislation, check against the policy, check against the rules to ensure that everything was done efficiently, effectively, and in compliance with the law. That's what I want to get into a little bit, but I want to ask just a rhetorical question. If I were to ask you guys how many public goods and services you have used since this morning, or maybe since this week, you would begin to have an appreciation as to perhaps whether it was good or bad, why we're going to have to start paying greater attention. There's a whole lot that the government is doing that impacts the quality of our life on a daily basis. Now, this is the space, I'm using this as an example here in Jamaica, where all that magic happens. Do you have street light? The decision is going to be taken here. Let's say you have a fire problem and your house catch a fire. Good God, the biggest investment you'll ever made. Is there water in the hydrant? How long will it take for a fire brigade to get there? If you were under some attack, I don't know, and you need to call the police, does the nearest station have a police car? All of these questions, impact the lives of Jamaicans every single day. And this is where, and this is why I call this a sacred space, because this is where those decisions get made. Now, the beauty of it is the seat of accountability, the parliament. Now, I didn't have enough space to put it nicely on that little thing I saw in the parliament. So I broke it up and then I looked back at it and I said, wow, accountability. This is the place where our elected representatives are supposed to have the ability to hold who to account. Now, I'm going to ask that again, because this becomes very important, I think, in our understanding how we are going to improve each of our islands. Now, the question was, seat of accountability. In this space, we have all our elected representatives that have been empowered by law. So they have been empowered and they have the ability to hold to account who. Can anybody finish that statement for me? Or parliamentarians in that same space are holding some people to account in that space. Who are they? Let me give you a clue.
The government.
Absolutely, that's correct. Now, this is the thing that those who know more about governance and government, I didn't study political science or public administration, but I'm really trying to stir the nest. Our Prime Minister in Jamaica has said he's willing to look at the Constitution to review it. And I would actually put this at the top of the list. It is a very difficult space in the sense that if Parliament's job is to hold the government to account, and the government are those frontbenchers that form the cabinet, can you begin to see a bit of a tension and a conflict and an issue in that arrangement of governance? Is there anybody who wants to comment on that? What do you think the challenge would be? That in the parliament that has to hold the government to account, we have parliamentarian colleagues that are a part of the government. What do you think that challenge would be?
One of the
That
challenges.
we would have a conflict of interest.
That's the heart of it. Yes.
Yeah.
Can anybody else? I think there's somebody else trying to maybe comment
Remember
on that.
Parliament has two sides,
Mm-hmm.
government and opposition.
Right.
The role of the opposition is to hold the government feet to the fire, to ask the questions in relation to, there's this project. Who was the contractor who was awarded to? What was the procurement process?
Okay.
Who was on the board or in the procurement unit? Are
Love
there
that.
issues of conflict? I don't want to cheat, so I will continue.
So Renee, I am so happy that you said that, because I'm going to challenge you a little bit on this, because that's exactly the discussion I wanted to have with this slide, and I'm going to tarry on it a while, because The role of Parliament is to oversee the government. Who else makes up Parliament? Certainly, I'm going to come back to this in a minute, sorry. Actually, I'm going to skip that, sorry guys. So what we have here, for those who are not familiar, but the setup in every Parliament is really the same. These are the opposition benches. But if it's the Parliament that holds the government to account, then anybody want to comment on the section I've shaded there? Who's on that side? Those are members of the government party. But if Parliament is supposed to hold the government to account, is it not also the responsibility of every member of Parliament who is not in the cabinet, which is the government, to be holding the government to account? So I grew up in Jamaica, and I suspect many of us do, where I've actually grown not to like the word opposition, because what it did, it set me up to believe that that is really the job. And that's sometimes what the news carries most of the time, showing us the opposition opposing. But for someone who has really taken an interest in Parliament and governance, and I could show you some clips, the amazing civility, the conversations that take place when the opposition gives a recommendation and the government responds. It's not to oppose. But the point I really want to make here is one best made by something that MP Juliette Holness did in October that I rarely saw, but I applauded and I got excited. Now, for those who are not Jamaican, this particular MP, the Holness, is the wife of our Prime Minister. She is a member of Parliament, and needless to say, on the government side. But in the cut and thrust of COVID, last October, Mrs. Holness, sitting in the House, was very critical of the government, very critical of the Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Health and the minister, her colleague, on the government side. Now, that is actually something, I'm putting it to you tonight, that is supposed to be the norm, because it is the job of every parliamentarian to hold the government to account, not the opposition to hold the government to account. And if you think about it for a minute, folks, who is Mrs. Holness representing? Not the Jamaica Labour Party. She is representing the constituents of East Rural St. Andrew, as she explained that day. And it's too much to get into, but the Constitution, for example, of Jamaica does not speak to one political party. You will not find that phrase. It is Jamaicans who have offered themselves to serve their constituents and the nation. It does not recognize a party. We end up with political parties because out of convenience and I guess strategy, these citizens said, look, we're stronger together. So why don't we go to the electorate as one? But the Constitution doesn't recognize that. The Constitution recognized 83 Jamaicans who came and applied for a job. And we gave them that job. And that's one of the things I've been saying to Jamaicans. I don't see it anymore as an election process. We need to begin to look at this, that we have $860 billion to spend. And we need 63 Jamaicans to make some decisions for us where that money needs to go. And then as government spends it, to oversee it and monitor it to make sure that we get value out of our money. These are jobs that they have applied for. And the job of a parliamentarian who is not in the cabinet is to hold the government to account. And so I'm not quite sure who made the point about the conflict of interest, but that is exactly what is at the heart and the core of the challenge that we have with governance. And that's a lovely debate that we can have, but I just wanted to make that point for you. Outside of the members of parliament, you have the media, who, I'm at work, 10 o'clock when the parliament is sitting, I can't be there. So we have this, what we call is it the fourth Renee? I think the fourth estate. The media, that's a very important institution in the accountability chain. And then last, but by no means least, the citizens in the gallery. That's you and I. Now, I want to quickly just talk to you about this because at another time when we have some other workshops, we can explain it a little bit better. But this budget oversight journey, and I'm going to say it really fast, begins with the accounting officer, the permanent secretary, and the internal auditor. We spoke about the Auditor General's department, which most of our islands have. They check in to make sure everything is going the way it should go so we can get best value out of our taxes. I'm not going to touch on these. Her reports go straight to the Speaker of the House, who passes it on, as Renee said, to our Public Accounts Committee. The Public Accounts Committee calls in the public technocrats and ask them all kind of questions as to what went wrong, ask them why, with the idea being that at the end of the year, this bipartisan committee, opposition and government, will put forward a report back to the parliament suggesting what are the changes and the remedies that need to be made to ensure that we don't continue to lose money. This now, when the parliament makes a decision on that goes to our cabinet. Our cabinet then has a meeting, talk to the minister with the portfolio of the issue. He comes back to his permanent secretary and gives her an instruction. And that instruction might end up in corrective measures, dismissals, fines, convictions, or maybe just some budgetary support to correct a problem. Now, what is the problem here in Jamaica? I want to put it to you guys that one of the main problems why we keep on seeing these headlines is this. There is a major obstruction between what our representatives who sit on that PAC, who for 1 year looking at the most egregious billions of dollars of losses, and it's their job, who are monitoring government to now come back to the parliament and say, look, these are our recommendations. Well, based on the research that JAMP has been doing, and if you think about it, our research has gone back, we call it 16 years now, where not once has that report made it back to the agenda of the parliament for our representatives to discuss it. Now, if it doesn't make it to that agenda and it's not discussed and debated, then what happens? It doesn't make it to the cabinet. It doesn't make it back to the permanent secretary. And therefore, what happens Jamaica? What happens Barbados? What happens St. Vincent? The problems just keep on recurring because it's human nature. If nobody's checking up on me, if all we have to deal with is a 9-day wonder, then I'm just going to keep on doing what I've always done. Now, there are some times, however, when the cabinet does make a decision. And that is more or less when the media covers a story and then the citizens of our islands start to ball out, call the talk show, start to write. Then the cabinet steps in. But I want to share with you that what this big block here is about is one of the main reasons why we keep on seeing the losses that we do. There's an obstruction there, and we have to lobby our parliament to say, look, the PAC every year produces this small report with extremely important information. If it does not get on this agenda and debated, then we, the people, are going to keep on losing the money and seeing the headlines that we continue to see. So I share that with you. For 16 years, that keeps on happening. So very quickly to complete this whole picture here for you before I show you how we solve the problem. Here in Jamaica, we have, look at that, guys, that's impressive, you know. The institutional framework has 17 very important people involved in the accountability framework. Now, what's amazing is if I were to ask you, you probably would never say to me, Jeanette, 10 of these have the power to sanction. Because that's the heart of what Jamaicans and citizens all over the Caribbean keep saying, hey, how come nobody not being held to account? But there are 10. Let me tell you who they are. The permanent secretary of every ministry. Gone are the days when I was in government and a permanent secretary could hire and fire. The Governor General has now delegated that responsibility to permanent secretaries. We need to find out why they're not using that power that has been given to them. A financial secretary is an extraordinarily important permanent secretary, the PS of a Ministry of Finance, with even more powers than the permanent secretary. And that's another thing Jamaicans have to unpack. What can the financial secretary do that she has not been doing that could be a game changer for governance? The Public Services Commission, the CEO of public bodies, the CEO of our executive agencies, the Integrity Commission, the Director of Public Prosecution, MOCA, has now been given power to prosecute the cabinet and the Prime Minister. Now, let me just clarify for us. Number 9, the cabinet can only hold to account the persons that ministers have appointed to boards. Beyond that, not a public official. The Prime Minister can only hold to account the ministers that serve at his pleasure in the cabinet. But that is still an important thing to be able to say to you. Now, we have a whole heap of policy in Jamaica, guys, that's really impressive. And in the other islands, policy after policy after policy, guiding public officials about what they should do or what they shouldn't do. Legislative framework, just as impressive. In the early 2000s, we had a lot of scandals, one in particular called the Fat Cat scandal. The People's National Party gave us a swath of important legislation. And then in the latter years, we have 3 more extraordinarily important ones, but look at that. Why aren't we getting any accountability? Now, this is what 2021 looked like, just a few of the issues that we have had to face. But if we have this, if we have all of this, and if we have all those agencies, and if we have 10 people in government with the teeth to sanction, the question is, what's missing, guys? what's missing. And that is where I am saying to you, corruption and crime are closely related. They're Siamese twins, really. But they're not the same. From reading all the reports, Auditor General, Integrity Commission, Contractor General over the years, this is where corruption is taking place. This is not like a gang in Jamaica and we don't know where the next den of iniquity is propping up. We are getting, remember I said in the beginning that we're pretty good at calling to account, that's getting the reports. Wherever there's poor oversight in our islands, wherever there are poor internal controls, and wherever there is poor procurement, where in whichever agency, whichever ministry that these three are coming together, just like that plant in the beginning, we have created, I'm not going to say there's corruption, but we have created an environment where it's going to foster and people are going to take advantage of it. Now, one example, just to make the point, guys, as to why I say this fight against corruption is by no means as complex and as difficult as it has been made to seem. I'm going to give you an example here. Direct and emergency contracting in our islands. There are really only about 5 or 6 reasons when this should happen. If there's only one person can provide the goods or the service, that's obvious. If it requires confidentiality, like you're buying surveillance equipment for the JDF, can't go to everybody. That's not something you want everybody to know. If public safety or property is threatened, if a sewer main breaks in the middle of halfway tree, in the middle of Port of Spain, you don't have 6 months or 3 months to tender. It needs to be dealt with now. So the government provides a way in which we can respond. Or if it's a tender process that would result in losses to the people of Jamaica or there's a national concern. Now, in the light of what I just said, if we get reports every year that tell us things like this, and I'm just going to give you just 4 quick examples to reinforce the point. JCF, this is the police force that's there to empower us, to keep the law, to ensure that the law is being kept by others. But our Auditor General tells us 2.2 billion spent, meals, clothing, and 81% of that was spent without public knowledge. Same thing, Rural Agricultural Authority, 1.6 billion, 112 road contracts, 1 billion spent with pre-selected contractors. Nobody knows what the selection criteria was. And 500 million, which is $500 million spent, no public tender. Consultants had at the Ministry of Health, 36 million, only 1 consultant invited. Procurement Committee didn't know about it. The National Contracts Committees, Ministry of Education, 1.3 billion, 122 contracts for school repairs. And what happened, guys? Awarded without public tender and knowledge. Now, this information comes right out of what Renee talked about. The PSC gets this from the Auditor General. Our parliamentarians are aware. The laws that Jeanette just showed you are all in place. So where is the problem, guys? We have the information. We have all the laws in place. I put it to you, most of what happens here is the finger pointing and the tit for tat. Now, I want to show you, I'm gonna, in the interest of time, show you what the tool is that we're trying to develop for Jamaican citizens to empower us to change what I've just shown you a while ago. Now, my theory is that what's missing with all the laws and all the policy and everything that's in place, what is missing, and I'm convinced that's the same in all of the islands, is us. Now, you're hearing me because I have correctly inserted the webcam that has the microphone in it. If I hadn't inserted that webcam properly in fully so that all the connectors were touching in the laptop, you wouldn't hear me. I would be complaining about this webcam that I just bought. But the truth of it is nothing is wrong with the webcam. Nothing is wrong with the laptop. It just wasn't properly engaged, and it was designed for it to snugly fit in so the webcam could do what it's designed to do. I share that example because that's exactly what I think is happening in all our islands. The democracy was designed with the citizen in mind. Many of us have stepped out of the ring, we disengaged. Politics nasty and it dirty, and we can't bother with that. Knowing that, not realizing rather that the more of us disengage is the less that democracy can work. So my answer to the problem, looking here in Jamaica, is that citizens have to get involved. We have to mind with business. That $830 billion is ours. So I'm putting it to you that what citizens need, I think, are the tools to make it easier for them to do it. Now, I don't buy into the idea that Jamaicans are apathetic. Yes, only 44% of us went to the polls. I am more convinced that we don't know exactly what to do to get the kind of governance on the island that we want. So I'm just going to quickly share with you what JAMP has created, hoping that it might initiate some ideas in the minds of some members of the alumni to begin to try it in the other islands, because I think this could become a game changer if we all began to engage. Now, what we're trying to do in Jamaica here is to strengthen the existing mechanisms in the parliament and the government. We don't need no new ones. If we can strengthen the ones that exist, we will be on the way to change. The second thing is we're going to have to start to educate the citizens, basic stuff, guys, about public financial management. And the third is educate all you want. As I've said to you, there's citizens right here who probably know more about this than I do, but they're not willing to engage. So after strengthening and educating, we have to find a way to stimulate citizens to get involved. Now, how are we going to do that? Technology. We have created a website where there are 3 tools available to citizens, but also government. We have another 2 coming out by the end of this month that I believe will be a suite of accountability tools that citizens could use to create a game changer. And let me just show you, for example, how one of them works. The accountmeter here is Jamaicans saying, look, we're tired of the 9-day wonder. We have no mechanisms in government, through all the research that I've done, where when things go wrong, there is anybody in government following up to make sure that after the Auditor General says something or the PAC says something, that it is being remedied. Now, that to me is astonishing. But there's nothing to say citizens can't do that. Why? Because we have been empowered with the access to information legislation. So using that, we have created this, what we call an accountmeter. We're tracking more of what we call the egregious breaches that come out of the Auditor General's report. Why? It's my money. It's my business. So if I don't see my employees, which are the government, taking care of it, there's no reason why citizens can't come in the mix. Now, coming to this website, you can just simply do some searches. Suppose there's a particular government ministry you're interested in, do it that way. What if there's a particular type of breach? You can look that way. Or you can just put in a keyword and see what comes up. Now, if we put in, for instance, here, the National Housing Trust, in the interest of time, I've just done some screenshots to show you. 4 results would come up. Now, when you select one of them, it takes you to a page, guys, which summarizes what were the concerns of the government's auditor, our auditor. In the middle of that, we have a little graphic that shows you, with good news, that some of these actually do get remedied. Now, this was 100% remedied. Some of the Jamaicans will remember the Outer Many issue in 2014. In addition to that, we provide what? Social media buttons. You heard me say earlier that there is the technology working for us in terms of change and advocacy. If this is something you want to commend the government for, which we should, hit that button and big up the permanent secretary for the office of the Prime Minister and say, well done. If it wasn't remedied, push it out in social media, and we all know the magic that that can create. Now, we have the findings there from the AG's office, what JAMP does. We also put the recommendation for what needed to be done, whether it's the PAC says so or the Auditor General says so, and we give you what? An update. Now, we also attach the responses that we get. We write a permanent secretary and we say, PS, we see in the Auditor General's report X, Y, and Z. What steps have you taken to remedy this? And please ensure that you respond with documentation to substantiate what you have done. What is that, guys? That is me, you, the citizen, what? Minding our business. We also allow, like the Gleaner, like most of the newspapers do, space for citizens to talk about it. But in addition to that, we give you a deeper dive with an extract from the Auditor General's report. We're hoping that this is where the media in particular will come, a deeper dive into the issues from the newspapers, the different thought influencers, what they think, some of the more important discussions that take place in the parliament on that same issue. Now, this is my favorite page. Let me show it to you really quickly. Okay, so many of us have concerns and we read the newspaper and we get upset about it and we're like, boy, if only I knew who to talk to. Now, what JAMP believes is that if we remove the veil of anonymity and we share with the citizens who are always the 4 accountable officers to answer any of these questions that you were concerned about here, then that could possibly be a game changer. So right here, we have the Auditor General, Audrey Sewell, the PS, good PS. We have the Prime Minister, who happens to be the Minister for the Office of the Prime Minister. And we have the Board Chair, and we have the Managing Director. For, of course, the public technocrats, you have all their social media and their email, but of course, out of respect for the privacy of those who serve on the boards and the Managing Director, you have email. So you can immediately let them know. Now, if you wanted to know not just how a breach is being remedied, but what if you wanted to know how the Office of the Prime Minister was going? We're also trying to curate information. So right now we're tracking 4. And as you can see from the graphic, OPM is doing pretty good. No reason why you shouldn't hit that button and commend them for it. Now, if you scroll down, you would see the 4 that we're tracking. You'll be able to click on any of them and it will take you right back to the Auditor General's findings on what JAMP has. And last but by no means least, We couldn't just take a look at what's happening in the ministries and the agencies. If the seat of accountability is the parliament, then why not track our members of parliament? Can we find what we call accountability indicators that would indicate whether or not our parliamentarians are coming to work? I can tell you right now that there's a minister who's no longer in the cabinet. And for the last 2 years, he has only showed up 36% of the time to parliament. Now, how many of us here could show up 36% of the time on the job and still have that job? So these are some of the basic accountability issues. We track attendance, we track what's happening with the Constituency Development Fund. They get $20 million a year. What's happening with that? We track asset declaration. Each of our jurisdictions have that legislation that requires our parliamentarians to say what they own, what they owe, and what they earn. We track that to see are any of our parliamentarians offending under that law. We have a legislative tracker where we're also trying to demystify the parliament for the people of Jamaica. And last but by no means least, we have 3 more trackers coming. We have to understand the national budget. And right now, guys, it's kind of hard. This is like 20 pounds, 1,000 pages. This is tough. So what JAMP has done is created a digital tool to make it easier for citizens to begin to understand what's in our budget. What's in the budget for me? What can I get out of it? How can I understand, what's there and how can I get involved? We're doing a procurement tracker. Again, corruption really takes place a lot in the nexus between the private sector and the public sector. So we're going to begin to track all contracts over $500,000. And last but by no means least, we want to do a public board tracker. Public companies are one of the areas where there's quite a bit of concern. And we decided that we could design what we call an early warning system, even for the Auditor General, even for the Integrity Commission to utilize. Now, citizens partnering with government, minding our business, building the tools that other citizens, the media, and government can use to improve governance is really where we're going. And again, all I'm saying, guys, is my theory is the reason we're not where we're supposed to be in each of our islands has everything to do with the fact that we have disengaged from the process. So I want to really thank you. This is really just as much as I could do. I'm sure I've gone a little bit over the time, but there's so much more to unpack in each of these issues. But I'm really glad for the time to explain to you why I have hope, why I think we do have enough of the ingredients for change, and really and truly what Jamaica, Barbados, Trinidad, Anguilla, Antigua is waiting on is for citizens really to mind the business and to engage. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you, Ms. Calder. I think everyone here can agree that you are not only informative, but we also learned something and you were very much engaging. So thank you so much, Ms. Calder. I will now turn over the opposite question. Them in the chat or simply raise your hand and you can simply ask a question. And I see you getting a lot of commendations in the chat, Ms. Calder. So
well, thank you. God bless you guys. I need all the encouragement. Are there any questions?
Looking through.
Yeah, any disagreements, anything that says, boy, Jeanette, I'm not sure this will work, but.
I am looking through the chat, but I'm not seeing any questions.
Okay.
Hi, Tamoy. Paul Ward has his hand raised.
I'm just seeing great going JAMP, excellent presentation. Oh,
Thanks.
okay, thank you. Go ahead, Paul.
Hi, good evening. Jeanette, how on earth do you get all that work done? Who does the work?
Oh, wow. I have a small team of 4, but 4? It can be done. And what I want to say, guys, about the doing of it is this. Everything that we have on our site and everything that's coming from the new trackers is information that's available to citizens. The challenge that citizens have is that, guys, we have kids to raise and homework and all kinds of things happening. So it is a good idea to have the European Union funding a small number of citizens who are saying, we will get the information. So for example, the attendance of our parliamentarians, the government collects that. It already indicates to us that they think that that is something worthy of record. But the citizens don't have time to go send an ATI request to ask that. So it is necessary to have civil society organizations that can focus on this, bring all of this information out of hiding, make it available so that we can act on it. So I'm just saying, in a way, it's not so hard because a lot of the data is there buried under stuff. We're just pulling it out and trying to make it easily available and meaningful for governance and accountability. Yeah.
It may not be hard, but it's very time consuming, I'm sure. So well done.
It is, but
Well done.
I gotta be honest with you, I'm really passionate about this. I really believe in the possibilities that, and I'm not suggesting that I don't believe in our politicians, but I really have more faith in you put the tools in the hands of Jamaicans. Let's see what happens. I mean, guys, I was interested in governance for 8 years, but I didn't have a clue what to do. And people that looked at me and said, you know, she don't care, but I did. I just didn't know how to express myself. So this tool gives citizens their voice. And most importantly, I spent some time in the diaspora. A whole bag of Jamaicans over there, a whole bag of Barbadians and everybody out there really wanting to impact what's happening in the island. Now, what a tool like this does is that it removes the disconnect. The Jamaican at home has as much access to talking to any parliamentarian and expressing their voice through this as any in the diaspora. And that's something that really means a lot to me, that they are still going to be able to be involved, you know?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Paul. I'm going to go to Paul and Porter Jones. You can simply unmute your microphone and ask Ms. Calder your question.
It's not a question, it's a comment. I wanted to say thank you for hitting the nail on the head. We have children, we have this, we have that. Those reports are long and they're convoluted. And I remember looking at the one on electric vehicles when it came out first. And it requires a whole lot of bandwidth just to go through and understand and then to figure out what to do with it once you go through. So thank you for going through all of that for us, so that it's now simplified and we can join our voices to take action. Appreciate it. And thank you for the presentation.
Thanks, Paula. Thank you. That's it. We're trying to bridge, Paula, we're trying to create a bridge to access information for citizens easily. And as I said, very importantly, to also bridge the gap in accessibility. So we need to be able to access the people who we are paying to fix these things. And I don't want somebody just telling me all the things that's wrong. I want you to empower me. For those of us, and there are many Jamaicans and many of us right here who, if we have the tools, we will use them. And that's the thing I want to say now, guys. We've been developing this, and as Paul said, it takes time and it takes love. If citizens don't use it, then it's sending a message to our parliamentarians and our politicians.
Nobody cares.
It's exactly, and I know, and if I can just speak frankly, I know they're watching. I know they're looking. I know they're wondering how citizens are going to respond to having this kind of information. So like any tool, if you don't use it, it is meaningless. It is meaningless, right? And I like who said you lose it, because let's be frank, I can't waste the taxes of the people of the European Union. So I don't know who is willing to invest in what we're trying to do has to be able to say, yes, citizens needed this, or the funds also dry up. So this is also a cry to say, guys, we're going to do the best we can by you, but you're also going to have to do the best by the country and use it. Yeah.
Do you know if your parliamentarians are exposed to, in the initial stages when each year, or when you have elections, they're exposed to public administration, so that, because they come from all different walks of life and different backgrounds and so on. Are they ever exposed to what is cabinet governance and how ministries, especially things, because people will feel, you know, you get in there and I could give my friend a contract and all this sort of thing. Are they exposed to any sort of training?
Yes, I am. I was very pleased when our Prime Minister, we have about 20 new, fresh, green, and they're young parliamentarians, which is wonderful. But you come in, and if you don't mind sharp and you don't get that training, you just kind of copy what you see the veterans doing, which is not always the best route to go. So he literally, not using taxpayers' money, paid, and I would imagine donors, you know, private interest, for these parliamentarians to be trained. And our Integrity Commission, which is really our major anti-corruption body, has also taken the cabinet first and is now going through with all the parliamentarians, teaching them parliamentary procedures and educating them, Renee, on corruption initiatives. So I would say yes, but to be also open and fair, the Clerk of the House of Parliament has often said that at the beginning of every parliamentary term, there is training, but she complains also about the attendance. So I can't say that everybody is taking advantage of it, but I would say to you that it is available. Yeah, it's available.
Okay. Great.
Yeah.
Because that's one of the things that initially when we came into office, from different things,
Yeah.
A university lecturer, as you know, as a university lecturer, will always be one. So
Yes.
he insisted that he got his different friends in public administration and so on, about over a 3-month period to do that sort of training. And people found it, I know people found it difficult, some people found it difficult. Yeah. Even some of the public servants found it difficult because some of them didn't go to the route of the formalized public administration training.
Well, what I would like, Renee, is to see citizens getting some of that training. Parliament used to bore me to tears, but the more I understand parliamentary procedures, it has become one of the most fascinating things for me to sit down and watch. So I actually am not terribly happy that we are limiting it, especially because in Jamaica, civics has been out of school for decades. I think it's also important that the citizens begin to understand governance and government. Yeah.
What the schools do, they bring the children to Parliament to see Parliament in action. Parliament is broadcast live on radio, TV, everything now, you know, to get them engaged, because we have the same issues and problems that people would sometimes, they will call and say, how this happened to happen? And you have to explain to the citizen what is the process and why you have a process. But this is quite a wonderful program that you have here. I was very intrigued by it when I saw it.
Thank you, Winnie.
Bearing in my parliamentary background, and I to do some work in governance. So I was very interested. I wanted to see what are the aspects that you're going to cover. And these are very essential because a lot of people haven't got a clue, as you say, about how government works. They actually think that some guy will take out his checkbook and write a thing to fix a road. They don't understand.
Let me just say, Renee, that you hit the nail on the head again, because what I find is it's just human nature. If you don't understand something, are you going to have the confidence to engage on it? No. Well, there are some people who do, whether or not they are informed, they will. But the vast majority of us, if this is a mystery to us, if we don't really understand what's going on, we kind of really step back and watch. The more citizens understand is, I find the more confidence begins to build and the conversation between themselves begin to change. But most importantly, the conversation with our elected representatives have to change. So for me, the key, like everything in life, is educate. Is every Jamaican or every Barbadian or every Trinidadian or every St. Lucian going to be interested in governance? No. But I personally feel that the Jamaica that I live in today, whenever I see our prime minister or a government retract from a position they take, when I look at it, it never take more than 2,000 people to get them to backpedal. So we don't need everybody in this country leaning in. So I would say to you, I'm aiming at impacting 1%. If we can do that with that 1%, I think we have the kind of parliament where they would respond to even 1% of Jamaicans demanding better governance. Yeah, that's what I see. Thank you, Paul. 30%. Jeanette, you have told me that you don't get responses from. Oh, no. Paul, we just did an assessment. Paul is asking me about the access to information. I was very impressed with a letter. And guys, this is how the magic happens, you know. So Paul, as a citizen, has been trying to get answers from some entities, public entities, and he didn't give up. He wrote to the Gleaner. And then a member of my staff saw it, showed it to me. I reached out to Paul and said, Paul, this is at the heart of what we do. Can we assist you? You understand what I'm saying, guys? That's the magic of it. So now I was sharing with Paul that we don't get answers to every access to information request. No media, nobody does. But a 73% turnaround is not bad. I can't complain about that. So Paul, just to correct you, we are doing better. It used to be 44%. Last year, we got 73% response. It's good to know that we have a public sector who would even give 70% response to citizens writing in. I would see that. So I just want to encourage you and encourage others to use the legislation that we have. Yeah. How can we as citizens help? Ruth, hey, well, Ruth, What we have really tried to do, especially I know Ruth is in the diaspora, and can we just level? The Jamaicans and the members who are living abroad from the other islands have a little bit more courage than many of us who do, and for obvious reasons, yeah? And so I would say, Ruth, using this tool, using your voice through the tool is a big way to go. All of our parliamentarians, well, most of them are on social media, even though they might not respond. They see the response to the work that we're doing, and they are taking note of it. So I would say head to the portal, Ruth, leave a comment, hit that social media button, ask a question. It's just there to benefit from the information. And as I said, you know exactly who to write. The buttons are all there. Let me say this much, guys, and I didn't mention it because of time. Ruth, the MP tracker. I'm really embarrassed to say this in 2022, but there's nowhere in Jamaica where citizens can go to find out where can I call my MP, how can I email my MP, or where is the office for the Member of Parliament. So JAMP has filled that gap by collecting all of that data, because each parliamentarian has a profile page. And that is really what brings most Jamaicans. They're Googling for the MP, and this is really the only place that they can come and find out the address for the constituency office, the email to talk to the elected representative. And I don't know how the rest of the islands feel about that, but I think it's a crying shame, yeah? So that's another thing, Ruth, getting through the members of parliament through JAMP's portal indicates to them that, yeah, citizens are supporting citizens who are interested in governance and reaching out to them. So there's the name of the website, take a look, see, following us on Twitter in particular. We're trying to get into Facebook, and I'm not so good on the rest of the social media, but following us is also another good way to signal that citizens are supporting what these citizens are trying to do for governance. So that's another important way in which you can help us to get the message out. Follow us. We also have animated videos around governance that we're explaining and teaching. So we've done one on how a bill becomes law. We've explained asset declaration. We've broken down the Constituency Development Fund into a video, and we're about to do one on access to information and the budget. So that's another way in which we're trying to educate through social media, these key governance features that citizens need to understand a little better. Hashtag mind your business. That's really how I see it, yeah? Alrighty, have I exhausted the questions, guys? Thank you, Rohan. And I must say that if Tamoy will have me back, guys, this is really just scratching a bit of the surface. Each of these, we can go a little bit deeper to unpack it so that we're a little bit clearer. But I would be happy to come back at any other time when you would have me. Yeah, I'd be grateful. Thank you, Donna. It was a pleasure. And I'm very easy to find. So guys, head to the site, head to social media, follow, and just continue to support JAMP through your own digital voice in what we're trying to do. Thank you very much.
And thank you so much, Jeanette, for taking the time out to share this information with us. It's genuinely appreciated, and we'll definitely be in touch, you know, for part 2, because there's more to dive into. So we'd want to get to that. Renee, did you have something to say before we close? So your mic was
I was just
open.
about to say the same thing, to say thank you.
Okay.
And you know, the more people become educated, it really helps. It really helps. And going also to other political organizations, because some political organizations provide training for MPs, and I know the clerk of the house will get frustrated about that.
Yeah.
But we had a very old statesman who insisted before we put one foot in Parliament, it was Holy Thursday, find yourself.
Yeah.
He drilled us like a army captain, you know. But you have to have that sort of discipline, and it helps. It really, really helps. But you've done an excellent job. Thank you so much. This is
Thank you so much, Renee. Yeah, appreciate it. All the best, guys. I'll see you in the digital space soon. Good night. Yeah.
Good night. Thank you again. Good night, everyone.
Good night, everybody.
Good night. Bye.